Hotline Miami 2's nonlinear storytelling really stands out when playing the game. One minute, you're in the 1990s, exploring a Miami subway station. Next thing you know, you're in war-torn Hawaii with a flamethrower. This was new to the series, though hardly overwhelming to the average Hotline Miami player, who had to deal with much greater mysteries in the past. The funny thing is though, it's not even a new thing in the series. That's right, the second installment is not the first one in the series to feature a storyline told in an out-of-order fashion. The first installment is. If this notion seems false to you, ask yourself this. How did Richter get caught? I actually spoke on this briefly on a livestream I did with the 2007 gamer.
Half your audience came from the Hotline Miami vids. Yeah, I know that. That's why I want to keep making things that aren't Hotline Miami, so I'm not fucking Yazto and just making Hotline Miami videos till I die and they're all shit. The hell do you have to do for Yatsu? I just don't like him. I just don't like him.
Oh yeah, so that was a great stream.
Had a great time.
Maybe you'll see me in a fucking Yasta video sometime soon. Who knows?
Exactly.
I just don't like him.
I actually spoke on this briefly on a livestream I did with the 2007 gamer. And the general premise is this. Richter was sent to kill Jacket. We know that this is not his first mission, and he's never been caught before. So, why now? Not only is that unanswered, but beginning trauma raises even more questions. When the cop talks about girlfriend with Jacket's doctor, listen to what he has to say. You couldn't save his girlfriend. This implies that she wasn't immediately declared dead on the scene, even if she seemed like a goner to us, which means that ambulances must have showed up shortly after Richter's shooting. But how? Richter has a silenced Uzi. It would not be loud enough to alert neighbors. And it's not like Richter calls 911 after his kills. I mean, he was shocked to find out Jacket was alive. You would have to agree that this leaves us with an incomplete narrative, right? How did ambulances and the authorities come quickly enough not only to save Jacket, but to arrest Richter as well? The answer can be found by simply assuming that the first game story is told in a similar manner as that of the second game. Out of order. It was initially assumed, for example, that Jacket throws up here because of his overwhelming guilt of killing a non-Russian. However, Jacket kills a bunch of non-Russians in assault. Now, you and I could go back and forth about whether or not he did that because he was angry about his girlfriend's death, or perhaps he just really hated Richter, or maybe he even knew that the police and the Russians were working together. Or instead, we can avoid that debate entirely by suggesting that before he went to this alley, he went to this bar while sick, got himself a drink, and because of that drink, he threw up. I mean, it would explain why Moon's barf is the same color. On the same note, we can avoid the debate as to how Richter got caught by suggesting that the events of Crackdown occurred before Jacket got shot.
Why?
Because Jacket has a license plate. License plates are useful to police officers for identifying the owners of a vehicle. Oftentimes, it can even help locate where the car is garaged. This information is especially useful with the knowledge that there were police present at this raid. None inside the building as the raid was happening. That means the officer is inside the vehicle and was able to see Jacket's plates as he left. That means in order to catch their Miami maniac, all that is left to do is to go to the Department of Highway Safety and look through the records and find information tied to this license plate. Once they've done that, they have his name, vehicle model, and address. All that is left is to collect their suspect. Or in this case, both of their suspects, as Richter would have been caught on his way out. You see it now, right? All of Hotline Miami is a puzzle. It is now our job to solve it. If it were possible. While it might feel pretty clever to connect the dots in the way that we have, unfortunately, no matter what we do, we will never have a complete understanding of Jacket's perspective during this time. we cannot form an accurate chronology of the first game. If you're confused, I understand, so let me take you back to my most popular video. My video about who won covered one of the most popular questions about this game. Which perspective in Phone Home was correct on May the 23rd, 1989? In the video, I make an argument about Jacket's abilities, strength, and mentality that appeared to put bikers to shame. That, combined with a bunch of goofy theories, resulted in my conclusion that Jacket was the victor of their confrontation. But now I'm not so sure. Jacket and Biker's fight ends in two possible ways. Jacket either smacks Biker's face off, or Biker crushes Jacket's skull. We know for a fact that both of these are technically wrong and that both characters have flawed perspectives. Or do they? For one, I'm not even sure that this is Biker's perspective to begin with. In my video about Girlfriend, I mentioned that Don Juan is actually this man right here, and that Jacket likely interrogated him about what he was doing. It appears that this man has knowledge of Biker's activities, and since he came from a Russian vehicle, we know for a fact that he's a double agent. By the way, we know double agents exist because Biker says so when speaking to the janitors. This actually ends up giving us an explanation for why Biker appears to kill Jacket here. It's possible that Don Juan spoke to Biker after this moment, and Biker may have just told him that he pulverized Jacket's head in hyperbole. But Don Juan took it literally. So when Don Juan is being interrogated by Jacket, he ends up telling a piece of Jacket's own story to him without knowing, but tells him that Biker killed the operative that tried to stop him. But that means this story, as well as the rest of Biker's experiences that are shown to us in Answers, are taken with Jacket prior to the events that put him in a coma. Meaning that everything we see in that chapter is prone to every possible inaccuracy that such an event could cause. Now, if you don't believe this, that's fine. It's a little convoluted and probably leaves you with more questions than answers anyway. Luckily for us, there's a bunch of other things that clue us in as to which perspective is less reliable. Biker is shown to be just as vulnerable as Jacket in his sequences. Like every other character, he dies after just one hit. However, in Jacket's perspective, Biker can take far more abuse than your average operative. You need to remember though that Jacket is much stronger than a Russian mobster, so Biker taking more hits from him makes very little sense. We get to see Biker in Hotline Miami too, and he's not dead, which means that Biker didn't actually get his face whacked off. Speaking of which, Beard tells us that this did not happen. You're probably still not convinced that these flaws adequately prove that our main character lost, or at the very least, it doesn't prove that Biker won. So let me present you this. After Richter shoots Jacket, we get told by Richard that Jacket will never get the full picture, and that it's all his own fault. Then we are guided to a bed where our clothes change and we get to see a room we never see again in game. For a second, we see two Jackets wearing hospital gowns. Then we see Jacket's head explode. His body then disappears. You might have missed it, but we may find the answers we're looking for right here. Again, we enter a foreign hospital room. This is not the same room we are in Trauma. We get to see two Jackets in hospital gowns. We then see a familiar sight, a Jacket without a head. And just like Biker's body, we see it disappear. It's not real. This tiny hospital scene actually confirms something for us. It confirms that Biker didn't actually crush Jacket's skull. What really happened is he just severely damaged his head, and this puts him in the hospital, in a room that looks like this. You may have noticed that Jacket has bandages on his head, despite being shot in the chest. We could find an explanation for this by analyzing what Richard says. He explains that something Jacket does results in his inability to understand what happened to him. This is a confusing statement. A lot of this game's ambiguity comes from the fact that we're witnessing a lot of these events through Jacket's perspective, but retroactively within a coma recollection. A coma that he's not directly responsible for. So, how can his lack of understanding be his fault? You could possibly argue that it's Jacket's fault for joining 50 Blessings. Now you're the bad guy for having a hobby. Unbelievable. From my perspective, I just don't think it's fair to blame Jacket for not predicting that a fellow operative was going to come and shoot him one day, especially considering it was an unprovoked attack from what Richter said. So here's what I think happened. Jacket loses in his confrontation against Biker and was sent to the hospital. He wakes up with bandages on his head, which indicates that he suffered some form of head injury. Instead of being patient and waiting to fully recover, he escapes the hospital and goes back to his apartment, and he immediately goes back to taking calls from 50 Blessings. After a few weeks, he's in the middle of one of his missions that is suddenly raided by SWAT officers. He quickly flees, but police already have his license plate and possibly follow him. He gets to his apartment, his girlfriend dead, and Richter shoots him on sight, causing him to fall on his head, the trauma reopening his head wound that had not completely healed since the incident with Biker. The police show up shortly after he is shot, which ends up saving his life. Finally, he wakes up with bandages on his head, a result of that reopened wound I mentioned earlier. An injury that would not have reopened if Jacket had rested and recovered instead of going straight back to doing work for 50 Blessings. This is precisely why Richard says Jacket's lack of understanding was his own fault. Had he just waited until his head was fully healed instead of going back to his killing sprees, Jacket would not have the memory issues caused by his head's fracture reopening after he was shot. Jacket's recklessness is why he doesn't see the full picture, and why we can't either. Now, I can predict that some of you may have an objection to this or two, but for now, I'll address a possible source of confusion. If Jacket was taken to the hospital, surely 50 Blessings would have realized that Jacket was out of commission, and would no longer send him calls. If this is the case, how does he go straight back to taking their phone calls once he returns? My answer will take us back to a previous theory of mine. But first, take a look at Jacket's car. It has some interesting choices of words for him. The DW is obviously a reference to Dennis Whedon. The tag tells us that the janitors are the ones responsible for this vandalism. Treatment towards vehicles like this is reserved for when operatives don't follow directions. We see this with Richter and Jake. This means that the vandalism to Jacket's vehicle is due to the fact that calls were ignored. But that's not all. You'll notice here that Jacket was called a whore. This is an interesting manner of name calling, because even today in 2025, the word whore is generally a derogatory term targeted at women, with some exception. In the 1980s, however, it was almost exclusively used towards women. Jacket only has one woman in his household, so it looks like I may have to amend a previous theory of mine just a bit. After Jacket was taken to the hospital, the girlfriend is tasked by 50 Blessings to do Jacket's missions for him. When she doesn't comply, Dennis Whedon scratches his initials into the car, and one of the janitors calls girlfriend a whore, and eventually she does comply with the request, wearing a spare jacket from Jacket's wardrobe. When Jacket gets back from the hospital, he takes over girlfriend's missions to make sure that she's safe. Now, that was a lot to take in, but I actually have one question for the theorist out there watching this video. Our current understanding is that Jacket and girlfriend take a few bullets from Richter's Uzi. But if that's true, why is girlfriend's bloodstain visible, but Jacket's bloodstain isn't? If you know anyone that's willing to pick up my medical tab, send them to youtube.com/@-yaster. Pretty please? We made it to the end of another video. High five. I just want to ask you guys something before I just leave. How would you guys feel about a Discord server where we can all talk about our favorite game, Hotline Miami, and Hotline Miami 2? I thought it'd be a great idea, but with Discord's privacy issues, I wasn't sure if that would be attractive to you guys, so I wanted to ask real quick. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. With that said, take care.